Camera on. Camera's on.
20 seconds.
Lights on. Lights are on.
10
Countdown.
seconds. 7, 6. Wait. Before we start, I have an important question for you. Should I say something about the current pandemic, or are you already tired of it?
Oh, please.
Yeah,
Why not again?
Okay, that's somewhat of a mixed response, but I need to make a decision here. So, did you have enough of that topic, or should I say something?
I've had
Yeah,
enough
say
of
something.
it, please.
Oh,
hell no,
Okay.
stop.
Uh, okay. Okay. I can relate to both of you. I mean, we've been dealing with this for 6 months already, and yeah, you know, it's May now as of this recording, and it started in December last year. So yeah, so we're dealing with this for half a year, and on the one hand, you're still curious because after all, it's a deadly disease, but on the other hand, you just like to switch off and just watch something that has nothing to do with COVID-19. But you know what? I have the impression that only now that the initial fear and panic is gone, we start to have a more mature discussion about this. So, despite being tired of the topic, even those of you who rather would like me to talk about something else, give it a try. This, you know, and just bear with me. Maybe it's going to be interesting for you too. Okay, I guess we can continue. Thanks. Hello everyone, and welcome to Knowing the Background. If you have recently started your own business, then the current situation must feel something like this. It's not my meme, but I just think it sums the situation up pretty well. So far, my personal situation has been much better. I mean, I am employed, still, at least, and I'm also none of those essential workers, which basically means permanently endangered worker. On the other hand, I am affected too. God. Now, all I wanted to do was to start my video channel about the topics I'm interested in, you know, like history and languages, art of war, sociology, and so on. But no, it has to be about COVID-19 now, I guess. But despite the fact that we are dealing with this pandemic already since December 2019, there seems to be confusion about one very basic aspect. How should we call it? Is it coronavirus, COVID-19, SARS-CoV-2, Wuhan virus, Wuhan SARS, Wuhan pneumonia? And is it okay to call it the China virus? Well, if you're interested to hear more about this, welcome to Language. Coronavirus, COVID-19, SARS-CoV-2, or China virus. Now, which term was the first one that you heard in the news depends obviously on your country. But it seems to me that the first term that made it to the headlines was coronavirus. And also today, most people seem to speak of the coronavirus. Now, the irony is that term is wrong. And here is why. Infectious diseases can be caused by microbes like bacteria and fungi. As well, they can be caused by viruses, which are not considered microbes because they are, technically speaking, not a living organism. But that's another topic. What's important to know is that viruses come in different flavors. There are so many different types of viruses that there are as many as 8 levels to categorize them. More than I can remember, so let me read it out. Realm, phylum, order, family, genus, subgenus, species, and strain. To put a little meat to the bone, let's take a real-world example. Remember bird flu? This is how bird flu is categorized in this system. I'm not going to read that. And now let's look at the same for the current coronavirus. See something? Coronavirus is somewhere in the middle. It's a family. So that's why speaking of the coronavirus is wrong, because the coronavirus that causes the current pandemic is just one of the many coronaviruses that are around. And which coronavirus is it specifically? Well, if you follow the topic from the very start, December 2019, January and so on, the first term you probably came across is 2019 nCoV. 2019 stands obviously for the year when it was discovered. N means new. So they quickly realized, okay, that's clearly a coronavirus. That's the first term that made it into the news. But it still took quite a while before they isolated it and were then able to identify if it's an already known virus or if it's a new virus. And then they obviously first had to make up a name for it. Once they were through with that, they called it SARS-CoV-2. Or I'm going to say SARS-CoV-2 because that's a little easier. Now, when you heard SARS-CoV-2 for the first time, you probably asked yourself, SARS? Wasn't that another illness from like 20 years ago? And you are kind of right. In 2002, there was already another outbreak of pneumonia, also in China, but in another province and in another town, in Foshan to be more specific. When the doctors realized that those pneumonia cases were actually an epidemic and that the symptoms do not match any other already known illness, they had to find a new name for the illness, and they called it the severe acute respiratory syndrome. And then they did what we usually do in modern times. They tried to figure out what causes the illness. Once they isolated the virus, they called it SARS-CoV or SARS-CoV, which stands for severe acute respiratory syndrome related coronavirus. So yes, already back then it was a coronavirus and it caused SARS. So why is the virus causing the current epidemic called SARS-CoV-2? Well, you probably guessed the answer already. The virus causing the current pandemic is strongly related to the virus that caused the 2002 pandemic. In fact, they are so closely related that they are considered to be the same virus species. So the old virus has been renamed to SARS-CoV-1 to match the name of the current SARS-CoV-2. Let me show you that on a bigger screen. So the current pandemic is caused by a virus. The virus belongs to the family of coronaviruses. There are obviously other families of viruses which I showed left and right again. The species of the virus is SARS-CoV-2. There are other coronaviruses too, for instance, MERS. You probably heard of it. That was also called the camel flu, and there was an outbreak ever since 2012. And then, within the species of SARS-CoV, there are 2 known strains. At least, there may be more, but at least in the media we hear about 2 of them, SARS-CoV-1 and SARS-CoV-2. And that's pretty much it. Oh no, wait! Covid-19. Well, how does Covid-19 match into this? Well, it's actually pretty simple. One is the virus, the other one is the illness. Let me give you another example. We all heard about HIV. That's the human immunodeficiency virus. The illness that HIV causes is AIDS, acquired immune deficiency syndrome. So if you didn't know that, here's a collateral benefit of this video. And obviously there are plenty of other examples. For instance, very often we speak about the flu and we speak about the influenza virus. Well, because one is the virus and then there is the flu, the illness that's caused by the influenza virus. So in short, SARS-CoV-2 is the virus that causes the current pandemic, and the illness that is the current pandemic is COVID-19, which is an acronym for Coronavirus Disease 2019. However, that's a somewhat unwieldy name. Why not SARS-2 or SARS 2019? I mean, it's the same virus, it's the same species of virus, it's just another strain. Well, let's have Dr. Tedros of the WHO explain.
We had to find a name that did not refer to a geographical location, an animal, an individual or group of people, and which is also pronounceable and related to the disease.
Well, that sounds reasonable. There's just one thing that makes me wonder. Why would he explain a well-established rule? I mean, if these are WHO naming convention rules, then everybody should know that. Then you wouldn't need to explain it. Or is it a well-established rule? Let's have Bill Maher explain that.
Scientists have been naming diseases after the places they came from for a very long time. Zika is from the Zika forest, Ebola from the Ebola River, hantavirus, the Hantan River. There's the West Nile virus and guinea worm and Rocky Mountain spotted fever, and of course, the Spanish flu. MERS stands for Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome. It's plastered all over airports and no one blogs about it.
He's right. And the list is even much longer. I mean, look at this. And the last one is from 2012. So it's not we are talking about illnesses from a time where we have not been as, how should I say, sensitive. So definitely the first rule, that it should refer to a place or in the name of a country, that's not a well-established rule. What about animal? Well, that doesn't look much better either, does it? I mean, bird flu, swine flu, and, as I already mentioned, camel flu. Camel flu. I mean, as far as I know, some people from the Middle East are kind of tired of this stereotype that camels are all around the Middle East, which they are not, but it's called the camel flu, and nobody did bat an eye. So the statement that it had not to be named after an animal is clearly not a well-established rule either. And that should make one thing clear. Those are completely new rules. But why were they established? You know what? Maybe we can get closer to the answer if we invert the rules. Let's see what would be the outcome if we do the exact opposite of every of those rules Dr. Tedros spoke about. Let's start with a geographical location. So if we would call it after the city where the outbreak was, it would be Wuhan pneumonia or Wuhan SARS, which are, by the way, two of the names that were used in media and also in social media. If we name it after the country where it came from, it would be China pneumonia or China SARS. Okay, two terms we already have heard about. What if we call it after an animal? Well, that's something we've heard already too. Bat virus, bat coronavirus. If we would name the illness after it, would be bat pneumonia or bat SARS, which would be actually quite fitting because the last SARS is connected to bats too, although that's something people didn't know back then. Okay, also it shouldn't be named after an individual. Now I thought that that's supposed to protect the patient zero, but then I realized no, that doesn't make sense, because usually doctors are not permitted to give away the names of patients. Even for instance, patient zero, who caused the AIDS epidemic, like we don't know his name, although definitely the media would probably like to know that, but no, he did not give his permission to reveal his name, and the doctors never did. So it isn't about patient zero and any other prominent patient whose name has been associated with a virus. Oh, the she virus, right? Okay. And what about the group of people thing? Have you heard another name? Have you ever seen this? Yeah, CCP virus, the Chinese Communist Party, clearly a group of people. So it is pretty clear. Had it not been for those surprising new WHO rules, it would have been named the bat virus or the China virus or the Wuhan virus, and respectively the illness would be named after that too. So it's not so much of a surprise that Donald Trump referred to as the China virus. But wait, isn't that racist? That's a little bit of an irony that the Chinese government is pushing the narrative that using the term China virus is racist because the Chinese government is racist. For instance, did you know about this? That happened all across the country, all over China, where all media are controlled by the party. As a sudden, the new narrative was that black people are spreading the illness. Specifically black people. I mean, also foreigners in general, but specifically black people. And as a sudden, people were evicted from their homes, even mixed couples. The Chinese husband was allowed to stay, but the black wife, for instance, had to leave. Stuff like that. And by the way, if you want to see more about what's happening to black people in China, I put a link to a video in the description that shows what's going on there. Okay, but the fact that the Chinese government is racist is irrelevant to the question if speaking of the China virus is racist. After all, both sides could be racist, right? So the question remains, is it racist to speak of the China virus? Now, one of the arguments in favor of that is that Trump uses it. Why? Because Trump is a racist. The way he refers to, for instance, people from Mexico in their totality, not speaking about a specific group, but Mexicans in general are villainized, that's blatant racism. However, that's not proving the point either. Just because someone who is a racist does something doesn't mean that everyone who does the same thing is a racist too. For instance, did you know that Hitler was a vegetarian? Does that mean that being a vegetarian is anti-Semitic? Also, he owned dogs. You see the point. Now, the question of speaking of the China virus or Wuhan virus, pneumonia, SARS and so on is racist has to be looked at on its own, separating it from the fact that the current President of the United States was using it. But look at this list. How could it be that naming illnesses after the place where they come from or the country where it was discovered? Oh, let's take Spanish flu. Now, Spanish flu didn't even start in Spain. It just so happened that it was the first country where the media were reporting about the epidemic. The illness has already been raging in France, in Germany and England, but There, the media were hushing it down because that was still the end of the war and no side wanted to appear weak. And yet, nobody bats an eye. And nobody did bat an eye back then. Bet an eye. Okay, bad joke. And then this goes on. German measles didn't start in Germany. It's just German scientists figured it out first. But even if you look at those examples where the illness actually started at the place that the illness was named after, nobody's blaming the country or the province or the town or the river. Illnesses start somewhere, and that fact in itself is no one's fault. And that's why calling an illness after its origin isn't racist. It's not stigmatizing anyone, it's not besmirching anyone's reputation. So, in my opinion, definitely no. Calling it the China virus isn't racist. Oh wait, but there's another argument too. By its definition, racism is when you are spreading hatred against a race. There's also another definition which says it's racist already to claim that there are races. There are people who say there are no races. Unlike many other species, the differences between the different human populations are so small that they do not justify calling them separate races. Do you realize what both definitions have in common? They relate to the concept of race. China is not a race. China is a country. And the Chinese, at best, are a people, are a nation. So, for that reason alone, speaking of racism with regards to naming a virus after a country... But wait a second, isn't the xenophobia that Trump evidently shows against Mexicans not racism too? Because Mexicans are, yeah. But, as a matter of fact, he holds this disdain to Hispanics in general. And last but not least, I've got another argument for you. Do you know who referred to it as the Wuhan virus first? Public Chinese media. On the 9th of January 2020, it was the public Chinese television channel, the CCTV, who referred to it as the Wuhan virus. So long story short, no, I don't buy into that argument. Calling it either Wuhan virus or China virus or, pneumonia or SARS clearly isn't racist. It's just that the Chinese Communist Party very much does not want the virus and the illness to be called after where it came from. The Chinese Communist Party's campaign not to have the illness named either after the country nor after the town where it started is part of a larger strategy. It is pretty clear that the CCP tries to cover up the fact that that's where the illness started. You see that this is part of a larger campaign because they also repeatedly accuse other countries of being where the illness started. Remember when the outbreak was particularly dramatic in Italy? As a sudden in China, there were claims, it actually started in Italy. Then, for instance, when on US television, one of the stations reported about the first case of coronavirus in the United States, they twisted it to say, see, the first case occurred in the United States. Although that didn't make any sense time-wise. And ever since, the number of countries where China claims the illness actually started grows longer. For instance, in France, they figured out that probably the first case in their country was not from January, but from December. And voila! As a sudden, there was the claim, maybe that's where the illness comes from. And against that background, you might ask yourself, why? Why that effort? Why create so much bad blood between your country and, whatever other country you blame? Maybe it isn't that much bad blood because other countries usually don't feel guilty for being the country where the outbreak occurred. I mean, as I said, this is why nobody hitherto had a problem with naming illnesses after their countries of origin. But still, people are confused. Like, wait, what? We all know it started in China. Why do they as a sudden claim it started in our country? You know, it's not that we feel insulted, but it just isn't true. Well, if you'd like to see one, in my opinion, very convincing interpretation of why the CCP tries to convince the world, or at least their own population, that the illness didn't start in China, check out this video by China Uncensored. I think that they show very well what the mechanism is. Because one of the things that I have realized at some point is that totalitarian regimes in general have a tendency to cover up any type of big problems. Which is kind of an irony because it means all kinds of problems, which at first doesn't really make sense. Why would you try to cover up all big problems, including those you're not responsible for? I mean, okay, you will want to cover up corruption, and you will want to cover up inefficiency, and you would like to cover up, let's say, shortcomings in administration or the army or whatever. But why would you cover up, for instance, a famine caused by a drought? The interpretation given in that video is that, well, authoritarian regimes try to make the impression that they are all-powerful. But if you are all-powerful, then everything is your responsibility, including the stuff that actually isn't. So where governments of liberal countries which simply say, well, there is a disaster, you may judge us by how well we react to it, but you may not judge us by the fact that there is this disaster because we didn't cause it. Right? This is where an authoritarian regime will try to cover up the extent of the disaster as such. But maybe there's even a better explanation. If you have total power, you are the only legal party in the country. You control the entire state, every aspect of society, you control media and so on. So if you are in that regard all-powerful as far as you can be as a human organization, then you are definitely responsible for how well or badly the state reacts to a disaster. And that might be an incentive to play down the extent of the disaster as such. Because if it's not such a big problem in the first place, then you don't have to do that much. If it is a huge disaster, then all eyes will turn to you, and now you are responsible to make a good response. And you may be poor at doing that. But anyhow, whatever the motives of the CCP are, one thing is for sure, they wanted and they still try to do that, to dissociate China from the source of the outbreak. And so far, they have at least been successful in the official name is Covid-19 now, and not Wuhan SARS or bad pneumonia. But in the global picture, it didn't really work. While the CCP is obviously unable to censor media outside of China the same way they censor media inside of China, they do extort a lot of influence in media all around the world, including the so-called Western media, simply by using money. So repeatedly you will find newspapers, television stations, magazines, which pick up the narrative that the CCP is pushing. Things like that China bought the rest of the world's time, which they kind of didn't, but that's another video. But in general, the public is not convinced. At least, not when you look at the internet. But coming back to the name of the illness, Does it really matter? What's in a name? Shakespeare famously wrote in Romeo and Juliet. And he continued, that which we call a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. Well, he's right, in so far that there are things where the name probably doesn't really matter. Any other name, any other string of sounds wouldn't really change how we perceive it. But when it comes to something more abstract, like for instance an illness, which you cannot grasp, you cannot see, a name can actually mean a lot. Whether it's named after where it started, or whether it's named, for instance, after the animals it's associated with, it makes the phenomena more tangible. Bat virus. Yes, that's the virus that started with bat soup, or at least we thought. Or Wuhan virus. Yeah, that's the one from the city of Wuhan. China virus. Whatever. COVID-19, on the other hand, is clearly not supposed to explain any of this. The name was quite evidently conjured up to cover up where it came from, which animal it's associated with, and most importantly, who's responsible for the local outbreak not having been contained. And that brings us back to the last two names which I had on the list. The Xi Jinping virus. Xi Jinping, leader of China, and CCP, the ruling and only legal party of China. And that's also why the WHO has come under so much criticism. When they came up with this naming convention and those rules, which as it seems haven't even been officially adopted and written down anywhere, it became pretty clear that they are doing this on the behest of communist China. And that's just crazy, because the World Health Organization should be one of the least political organizations in the world. Their concern should be promoting global health, and that just wasn't the priority in the COVID-19 case. When Taiwan, for instance, informed the WHO that the virus is transmissible from human to human directly, and it does not require direct contact with infected wild animals, for instance, that information should have been spread around the world as quickly as possible, even had it come from, let's say, Swaziland, which I think is not recognized by anyone as an independent country. And yet, the WHO just didn't forward this information, which is only in line of the Chinese Communist Party. It's those pretty strong signs of a collusion between the Chinese Communist Party and the WHO, which led to a kind of criticism that's pretty surprising. The fact that the Deputy Prime Minister of a large industrialized country would go so far as to say that the WHO should probably rename itself to the Chinese Health Organization shows how big the frustration with what the WHO did in this crisis has become. And you can see this backlash also across social media. So whatever was happening behind the scenes between China and the WHO, it didn't really result in what China wanted, namely to convince the whole world that the problem centers elsewhere. Instead, it created a huge backlash, equally against China as against the World Health Organization. Which is very worrisome, because the world was a better place when most people could trust that the WHO will be politically neutral and focusing on health issues. Okay, so much for the terminology question related to the current pandemic. I'd like to follow this video up with two more related to the current pandemic. One is the reasons for the outbreak, and the other one is what we should do after the pandemic to avoid another one. So please tell me what you think about that. Also, I'd like to make a video that's not connected to the coronavirus, but is related to something I mentioned in this video. You will remember the list of illnesses that relate to the place of their origin. Now, there are two which might have been surprising to you. One is the English disease, that used to be the Polish name for rickets. Another one on the list is French disease. In various countries, syphilis has been called French disease. Not in France though. There it was called the Spanish disease. And I considered that to be very intriguing. So I started to investigate why that would be the case. And well, it's a somewhat interesting story. So if you'd like to hear more about the French disease, please tell me. Otherwise, thanks for watching and hope to see you next time.